city of Atlanta, Georgia, Pastor Michael Reed was a man revered by many. As the leader of First Light Church, he was a beacon of guidance and spiritual support for his congregation. His sermons were filled with hope and wisdom, and his devotion to his wife, Maya Reed, was often held up as an example of a model marriage. Maya was deeply involved in the church's activities, known for her kindness and dedication to serving others. Together, they seemed to embody the perfect union of faith and love. But beneath the surface, Michael was struggling with inner turmoil that would soon lead to devastating consequences. This is the story of Michael, a man who cheated on his wife with a transgender woman, a betrayal that made Maya do the unexpected. It all started on March 14, 2024, during a local event designed to bring the Atlanta community together through art and cultural exchange. Among the attendees was Ellie Martinez, a transgender woman who had recently moved to the city with dreams of showcasing her artistic talent. Ellie was passionate and deeply expressive, her art resonating with emotions that captivated anyone who viewed her work. By day, she worked as a barista, but her true essence was poured into the paintings she crafted late into the night. Her booth at the event featured bold, abstract pieces that caught the eye of Michael Reed, the well-known pastor of First Light Church. Intrigued, Michael approached her, sparking a conversation that quickly uncovered their mutual love for creativity and community work. Their friendship grew in the weeks that followed, rooted in shared initiatives aimed at helping local artists and providing community support. Initially, their interactions were casual and focused on their collaborative efforts. However, as time went on, the bond between them deepened. Michael, a man used to carrying the burdens of others, found solace in Ellie's empathetic presence. She listened without judgment, offering a kind of understanding that Michael hadn't realized he was missing. By June 2024, what began as a simple connection had transformed into a secret romantic relationship. Michael kept the affair hidden from his wife Maya, his church, and even Ellie's closest confidants, driven by a mix of fear and self-preservation. He knew that if his secret came out, it would destroy the life he had worked so hard to build, both personally and professionally. As a pastor, he felt the weight of his congregation's expectations, and the thought of losing their respect terrified him. At the same time, he convinced himself that silence was a form of protection. For Maya, who would be heartbroken, and for Ellie, who might face even greater judgment and scrutiny if their relationship were exposed. This complex web of rationalizations became his shield, even as the guilt gnawed at him daily. I suspect it was the weight of his son lying mortally that brought Ellie home to his last days at Shry's memorial and the day he finally died. Before we continue, please consider subscribing to this channel for more stories like this. As their relationship unfolded, Michael wrestled with a growing sense of inner conflict. His role as a spiritual leader meant he was supposed to embody moral integrity, yet here he was, entangled in a situation that went against everything he preached. Meanwhile, Ellie, who had been open about her feelings, believed that their connection had the potential to withstand even the most challenging circumstances. She underestimated the complexity of Michael's situation and the extent of his guilt, which loomed over him like a shadow. During one of their meetings, Ellie revealed more about her life before moving to Atlanta, including the struggles she had faced as a transgender woman seeking acceptance. Michael listened intently, but her openness only intensified his internal struggle. He admired her courage, but knew that his conservative congregation and the public image he had cultivated would make their relationship nearly impossible to disclose. These unspoken truths added strain to an already fragile dynamic. While Ellie remained hopeful, Michael's reluctance to confront the realities of their relationship hinted at the emotional storm brewing beneath the surface. By the middle of the summer, their relationship had reached a crossroads. Ellie started to push for clarity, expressing her desire for honesty and transparency about their future together. Michael, however, continued to evade direct conversations, torn between the life he had built and the new feelings he couldn't ignore. Their affair, once an escape for both, began to feel like a ticking time bomb, with both of them increasingly aware that the truth couldn't remain hidden forever. Michael's affair with Ellie created a storm of emotions he could no longer suppress. As a pastor, he stood in front of his congregation every Sunday, urging them to live with integrity and honor their commitments, yet he was deeply entangled in a situation that shattered his own principles. His love for Ellie was undeniable, but so was the guilt that weighed heavily on him. The thought of confessing the truth to Maya or his church was unbearable, as he feared not only the consequences for himself, but the pain it would bring to everyone involved. Ellie, meanwhile, was deeply committed to the relationship, believing in its potential despite its challenges. She often reassured Michael, hoping her unwavering love would be enough to ease his fears. But she underestimated the depth of his internal struggle and the secrets he guarded so closely. On August 2, 2024, Ellie decided she could no longer endure the uncertainty. She asked Michael to come to her apartment in Midtown Atlanta, determined to talk about their future. As he arrived, the tension was palpable. Ellie had prepared herself for the conversation, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional intensity that followed. She poured out her heart, sharing how she had been feeling ignored and uncertain about their future. Ellie spoke about how she needed clarity and felt hurt by Michael's evasive behavior. She admitted that his refusal to make decisions about their relationship made her feel like she was standing alone, holding on to hope without any assurance. Her words were raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of her frustrations and her longing for honesty in a way that couldn't be ignored. Michael, visibly shaken, admitted his fears but couldn't promise to take the steps she was asking for. He begged for more time, insisting he needed to figure things out, but Ellie's patience was nearly gone. The argument lingered, unresolved, leaving them both emotionally exhausted and questioning what was next. What Ellie didn't know was that Michael's actions had already begun to draw Maya's suspicion. Over the past few months, she had noticed changes in his demeanor. He was distant, distracted, and increasingly evasive about his whereabouts. Maya's intuition told her something was wrong, but she had no proof to confront him directly. Quietly, she started to observe him more closely, noting inconsistencies in his explanations and growing more convinced that he was hiding something. That night, after Michael left Ellie's apartment, Maya decided to check his phone while he was asleep. What she found confirmed her worst fears, a string of messages that hinted at an intimate connection with someone else. She didn't recognize the number, but the tone of the exchanges left no doubt about the betrayal. Heartbroken and furious, Maya resolved to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, she pieced together bits of information, slowly realizing that Michael's deception ran deeper than she had imagined. By mid-August, Maya's determination had reached its peak. She followed Michael to Ellie's apartment, hoping to confront him and put an end to the lies. As she waited in her car that night, she was consumed by a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. What she didn't expect was the devastating revelation she would overhear, one that would forever change the course of their lives and lead to unimaginable tragedy. Maya had been sensing that something wasn't right with Michael. He was acting differently, less attentive, often returning home late with reasons that seemed vague. She tried to dismiss it at first, convincing herself that his behavior was due to the pressures of his work as a pastor. But as weeks turned into months, her doubts only grew stronger. Maya began to observe him more closely, keeping her concerns to herself, hoping to gather enough evidence to confirm or deny her suspicions. On the evening of August 15, 2024, Michael claimed he had an important meeting, but Maya wasn't convinced. Determined to find out the truth, she decided to follow him. As she trailed his car through the streets of Atlanta, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. When she saw him park outside an unfamiliar apartment building, her heart sank. Keeping her distance, she watched as he entered the building. She stayed in her car, torn between storming in to confront him and waiting to see what would happen next. After nearly an hour of sitting in her car, overwhelmed with emotions, Maya couldn't bear the suspense any longer. She stepped out and entered the building, her legs trembling as she climbed the stairs to the apartment number she had seen Michael enter. When she reached the door, she noticed it was slightly open and voices could be heard from inside. She hesitated, her hand hovering near the doorframe, before leaning closer to hear what was being said. Inside, Michael and Ellie were in the middle of an intense conversation. Ellie's voice carried frustration as she brought up aspects of their relationship that Michael had avoided discussing. What Maya heard next froze her in place. Ellie mentioned something deeply personal about her identity that Michael had not yet revealed to anyone, especially not to Maya. The weight of the words hit Maya like a ton of bricks. In that moment, all the doubts, anger, and heartbreak she had been holding back came rushing to the surface. Unable to stay silent any longer, Maya pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight of Michael and Ellie together confirmed what she had feared, but the context of their heated conversation added layers of betrayal she hadn't anticipated. Michael was startled to see her, his face pale with shock, while Ellie stood frozen, unsure of what was about to unfold. The atmosphere was thick with tension as all three stood locked in a confrontation that none of them had fully prepared for. Inside, Ellie and Michael were having a heated discussion. Ellie's voice was filled with frustration as she revealed something Michael had not yet shared with Maya. Ellie was transgender. Maya, listening from the hallway, was stunned. This revelation compounded the betrayal she already felt. Unable to contain her emotions, she burst into the apartment, confronting both Michael and Ellie. The confrontation quickly escalated. Maya demanded answers, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Michael was at a loss for words, caught between his wife's fury and Ellie's heartbreak. The argument reached a boiling point when Maya, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation, grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. In the chaos that followed, Ellie tried to de-escalate the situation, but Maya's emotions were beyond control. In a moment of rage and despair, she stabbed Ellie multiple times. Ellie collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around her as Michael stood frozen in shock. Realizing what she had done, Maya dropped the knife and fled the apartment, leaving Michael to grapple with the horrifying scene. Panicked, he tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Ellie's lifeless body lay before him, and he knew there was no undoing what had just happened. The next morning, Ellie's body was discovered by a neighbor who had come to check on her after hearing loud noises the previous night. The police were called, and an investigation was launched immediately. Michael's fingerprints were found on various items in the apartment, leading investigators to question him. His initial story was vague, but the evidence pointed to his presence at the scene. Security camera footage from the building provided a crucial breakthrough. The footage showed Maya entering and leaving the building around the time of the murder. When confronted with this evidence, Michael broke down and revealed the full story, implicating Maya in the process. The police located Maya at a relative's house, where she was arrested and charged with Ellie's murder. The news of the murder and the circumstances surrounding it sent shockwaves through the community. Members of First Light Church were devastated, struggling to reconcile the man they had admired with the secrets he had been hiding. Maya's actions were met with both condemnation and sympathy, as some viewed her as a victim of betrayal and emotional manipulation. Ellie's friends and supporters mourned her loss, remembering her as a talented artist and a kind soul who deserved a brighter future. As the case went to trial, the complexities of the situation came to light. Maya's defense team argued that she had acted in the heat of passion, driven by the pain of discovering her husband's affair and the subsequent revelations. The prosecution, however, emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the fact that she had followed Michael to Ellie's apartment that night. Michael's role in the events was also scrutinized. While he was not charged with any crimes, his reputation was irreparably damaged. He stepped down as pastor, issuing a public apology for his actions and expressing deep remorse for the pain he had caused. The church community was left to pick up the pieces, grappling with feelings of betrayal and loss. Ellie's story became a rallying point for discussions about acceptance, identity, and the consequences of secrecy. Her friends organized art exhibitions in her honor, showcasing her work and sharing her story with a wider audience. The tragedy of her death served as a stark reminder of the importance of understanding and compassion in a world often divided by prejudice and fear. In the end, Maya was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to prison. Michael moved away from Atlanta, seeking a fresh start away from the shadows of his past. The community, though forever changed, vowed to learn from the events and work towards a more inclusive and empathetic future. The story of Pastor Michael Reed, Maya Reed, and Ellie Martinez remained a haunting chapter in Atlanta's history, a stark illustration of the devastating impact of secrets, betrayal, and unbridled emotions. What Maya did is unthinkable, but what happened in the following story, done by a pastor, is even more heartbreaking. It shows the degree to which people are willing to go to hide their worst secrets. On December 12, 2014, in the quiet city of Dayton, Ohio, a chilling story began to unfold. Mark Thompson, a pastor at Grace Community Church, was a man admired by many. In his mid-40s, he was seen as a pillar of the community, delivering impassioned Sunday sermons and leading his congregation with a seemingly unshakable moral compass. He lived with his wife, Laura, and their 3 children in a comfortable suburban home. He died short. However, Mark harbored a secret so profound that it would ultimately lead to tragedy. Mark had been leading a double life. Several months earlier, he met Jamie, a transgender woman who owned a small coffee shop downtown. Jamie, 30, had moved to Dayton from Cleveland in search of a fresh start. She was vibrant, warm, and welcoming, traits that drew people to her, including Mark. What began as casual conversations over coffee grew into something much deeper. Mark found in Jamie a connection he had never felt before. He would visit her shop under the guise of needing a quiet place to prepare his sermons, but those visits soon turned into secret meetings at a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. For Mark, Jamie represented freedom from the expectations and pressures of his life, but as their relationship deepened, so did the risks. Mark's actions were in direct conflict with the values he preached every Sunday. Guilt weighed heavily on him, but his feelings for Jamie made it impossible to walk away. Jamie, too, struggled with the secrecy, yearning for a relationship untainted by shame and fear. They both knew the stakes, but neither could bring themselves to end it. Laura, Mark's wife, began to sense something was off. Mark had become distant, spending late nights away from home and offering vague explanations about church meetings or counseling sessions. Her suspicions grew stronger until, on December 12th, she decided to follow him. That evening, Mark left the house, claiming he needed to prepare for Sunday's sermon. Laura trailed him at a safe distance, her heart pounding with anxiety. She parked her car across from the apartment he frequented and waited. Through the window, she saw him with Jamie, their laughter and embrace confirming her worst fears. Devastated and enraged, Laura drove home but couldn't sleep. The image of her husband with another person, someone so different from what she had imagined, consumed her thoughts throughout the night. She replayed the scene in her mind over and over, each time feeling the sting of betrayal anew. Laura's emotions ranged from heartbreak to an all-consuming rage. And by morning, she was determined to confront Mark. When she did, the confrontation was even more intense than she had imagined. Their argument was volatile, filled with raw emotions and accusations. Mark, caught off guard, admitted to his feelings for Jamie, hoping to appeal to Laura's understanding. However, his honesty only fueled her anger. She couldn't believe the depth of his deceit and the double life he had been leading. Her voice trembled with anger as she threatened to expose him to the church and the entire community, a move that would dismantle everything Mark had worked so hard to build. He was left shaken, his mind racing as he considered the catastrophic consequences her threats could bring. The weight of Laura's ultimatum left Mark in turmoil. Fear gripped him as he thought about the fallout, losing his family, his position at the church, and the respect of the community that looked up to him. He couldn't shake the image of everything unraveling and the judgment he would face. By December 14, Mark had made a decision. He reached out to Jamie, asking to meet at the apartment for what he described as a conversation to bring closure. Jamie agreed, unaware of the storm brewing inside Mark's mind. The meeting was set for 9 p.m., but Mark arrived early, pacing nervously in the apartment as he wrestled with his thoughts. His mind oscillated between desperation and the faint hope that there might still be a way out of the tangled web he had created. That night, the city was blanketed in a cold silence, the kind that only a December evening could bring. Mark arrived at the apartment early, his hands trembling as he let himself in. Jamie arrived shortly after, her face lighting up when she saw him, though her expression quickly turned to concern when she noticed his agitation. Mark began to speak, his voice unsteady. He told her about Laura's discovery and the confrontation that followed. Jamie listened, her own fears surfacing as she realized the gravity of the situation. Their conversation grew heated. Jamie, feeling betrayed and abandoned, insisted that she wouldn't remain a secret any longer. She was tired of hiding and demanded that Mark make a choice. Mark, overwhelmed by the pressure and the consequences of his actions, pleaded with her to understand. But Jamie stood firm, her resolve unshaken. She told him she would go to the church and reveal the truth if he didn't do it himself. In that moment, something inside Mark snapped. Blinded by fear and desperation, he grabbed a heavy object from the counter, a cast-iron skillet Jamie often used to cook. Jamie barely had time to react before Mark struck her. The force of the blow sent her to the ground. Her hands instinctively reached out to shield herself, but Mark was relentless. As she tried to crawl away, groaning in pain, Mark struck her again. This time, the blow was fatal, leaving Jamie lifeless on the floor of the apartment. Mark stood over her body, his chest heaving as the weight of his actions began to sink in. His mind raced, but it was clouded by panic and disbelief. The apartment, once a place of solace and love, now felt suffocating, the walls closing in around him. He knew he had to act quickly to cover his tracks. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he wrapped Jamie's body in a blanket, carefully avoiding leaving any evidence. Each movement felt surreal, as though he were watching someone else commit these acts. Under the cover of darkness, Mark carried Jamie's body to his car. He drove to a remote wooded area outside of Dayton, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble of fear, regret, and desperate attempts to rationalize what had happened. Arriving at the secluded spot, he scrambled to dig a shallow grave with his bare hands, the cold, damp earth chilling him to the bone. Dirt and leaves were hastily piled over Jamie's body as Mark's breath came in ragged gasps. As he stood over the makeshift grave, his mind screamed with the reality of what he had done, yet he forced himself to leave, convincing himself he could move past it somehow. Then, returning home, Mark tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but Laura noticed his disheveled appearance and the tremor in his voice. She pressed him for answers, but he brushed her off, claiming he was exhausted. Over the next few days, Mark's paranoia grew. He avoided the apartment and the coffee shop, hoping to distance himself from Jamie's disappearance. But her absence didn't go unnoticed. She didn't have a Phi's son that carried me. Friends and customers at Jamie's coffee shop began to worry when she failed to open the store. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and her landlord reported that she hadn't been seen at the apartment. A missing persons report was filed and the police launched an investigation. As they delved into Jamie's life, they discovered her connection to Mark. Witnesses recalled seeing him at the coffee shop regularly, and surveillance footage from a nearby camera placed him at the apartment on the night Jamie disappeared. Detectives questioned Mark, who denied any involvement. He claimed he had ended their relationship weeks earlier and hadn't seen her since, but inconsistencies in his story raised suspicions. He struggled to explain why he had been seen near Jamie's apartment on the night of her disappearance. His nervous demeanor during questioning only added to the detectives' doubts. Laura, grappling with her own guilt and anger, wrestled with the decision to come forward. She had noticed odd behavior from Mark in the days following Jamie's disappearance. His refusal to meet her gaze, the way he avoided talking about his schedule, and the restless nights where he paced the house aimlessly. The weight of her silence became unbearable as she pieced together the clues from Mark's behavior and their heated arguments. The case took a critical turn when a hiker stumbled upon Jamie's shallow grave while walking through a remote wooded area. The discovery shocked the community, and the police quickly cordoned off the site to search for evidence. Among the findings were traces of fibers matching a blanket from Mark's home, as well as his footprints leading to and from the grave. Forensic evidence linked Mark conclusively to the crime scene, and his arrest became inevitable. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Mark broke down during interrogation, finally confessing to the murder. He described the act as one of desperation, claiming he was overwhelmed by fear and pressure. However, his confession offered little solace to those mourning Jamie. Her friends and family, devastated by the loss, struggled to comprehend how someone she trusted could betray her so completely. Meanwhile, the town was left reeling from the dual shock of Mark's betrayal and the tragic, senseless loss of Jamie's life. The trial that followed was a spectacle, drawing national attention. Mark's double life and the tragic end of his relationship with Jamie became the subject of endless debate. Some saw him as a man who succumbed to unimaginable pressure, while others viewed him as a cold-blooded killer who had betrayed the very principles he had preached. In the end, Mark was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Laura and their children were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, while the community grappled with the fallout of the scandal. Jamie's friends and loved ones mourned her loss, remembering her as a bright light extinguished far too soon. The story of Mark and Jamie shows how hidden truths and fear of judgment can lead to unimaginable outcomes. Their lives, intertwined by love and secrecy, ended in tragedy, leaving behind sorrow and pain for everyone who knew them. In the quiet but deeply religious town of Allendale, South Carolina, a place where mostly everyone knew each other's business and the church stood as the centerpiece of community life, a shocking scandal unraveled, one that would forever alter the lives of its residents. This is the story of Daqua Lamique Ritter, a pastor revered for his moral teachings, who would go on to commit a crime so devastating it left the community with disbelief and sorrow. The story begins in 2019, a year like any other in Allendale, until whispers started to emerge. At the heart of the whispers was a woman named Dime Doe. Dime was a black transgender woman who was known for her warm smile and generous heart. People who knew her described her as someone who could light up a room, someone who carried herself with a quiet strength despite the challenges she faced. Dime spent her entire life in Allendale, residing in a modest home on the outskirts of town with her close-knit family. Among her family members, her mother stood out as her unwavering source of strength. She shielded Dime from the frequent judgment that came with standing out in a conservative small town, always ready to defend her daughter with quiet determination and love. But Dime had a secret. She was in a relationship with a man named Daqua Lamique Ritter. Daqua was a local pastor, a man revered in the community for his impassioned sermons and charitable work. His family had deep roots in Allendale. His father had also been a pastor, and Dakwa had followed in his footsteps, gaining respect and admiration from almost everyone in town. But Dakwa lived a double life. While he stood at the pulpit preaching about righteousness and integrity, he was consumed with fear and shame over his relationship with Dime. He kept their connection hidden, terrified of what his congregation and family would think if they found out. Dime and Dakwa's relationship was complicated. They met years earlier at a local diner where Dime worked as a waitress. Dakwa often came in late at night after church meetings, and over time they began talking. Dime's wit and intelligence drew Dakwa in, and what started as casual conversations turned into long, secretive nights together. But their love was shadowed by Dakwa's inability to fully accept the relationship, or himself. He would disappear for days, overwhelmed by guilt, only to return to Dime with promises he couldn't keep. Next, we're going to see how Dakwa found himself in troubles that led him to a lifetime in jail. But before we continue, let us know what you think about the way secrets can control someone's life. Do you think fear can really push someone to do something as extreme as murder? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories like this. Let's continue. On the hot summer day of August 4, 2019, a quiet buzz began to spread through Allendale. It started with hushed conversations at the church and murmurs at the local diner. People spoke of unusual sightings and whispered about text messages shared between Dakwa and Dime. Some claimed they saw them meeting late at night in secluded areas, while others hinted at arguments overheard near the church. The pieces of a hidden relationship began to surface, each rumor feeding into the next, until the whispers turned into a storm of speculation that engulfed the town. The tension mounted, and the walls of secrecy that once surrounded Dakwa's life started to crumble. Rumors about Dakwa's affair with Dime began to circulate around town. No one knew for sure how the secret got out, but the whispers grew louder until they turned Dakwa. The turn became bitter, as the wife of a woman he'd still nor described, into outright accusations. Dakwa's congregation began to murmur, and even his family, once his greatest supporters, started keeping their distance. Suspicion hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and Dakwa could feel the weight of judgment bearing down on him. His carefully constructed image of respectability and moral authority was falling apart, piece by piece. That evening, Dakwa sent Dime a text, asking her to meet him in a secluded area just outside of town. It was a place they'd visited before, surrounded by tall trees and shielded from curious eyes. The sun was beginning to set as Dime agreed to the meeting, unaware of the storm raging inside Dakwa's mind. When she arrived, she noticed something was off. Dakwa's usual composure was gone. He paced nervously, his words tumbling out in a rush, his eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. Dime tried to calm him down, suggesting that they could figure things out together. She had no idea that Dakwa's fear had spiraled into a dangerous mix of anger and desperation. He couldn't stop thinking about the rumors, the judgment, and the possibility of losing everything he had worked for. The pressure was unbearable, and he felt trapped, with no clear way to escape the situation. His thoughts grew darker, and a chilling resolve began to form in his mind. As the light faded and the first stars appeared in the sky at night, Dakwa made his move. He had brought a gun, hidden in his car, a sign of how far he had already sunk into his own despair. He retrieved it, his hands trembling but his resolve hardened. Dime, seeing the weapon, froze in shock and disbelief. She pleaded with him, trying to reach the man she thought she knew, but Dakwa was too consumed by his inner turmoil to hear her. In a moment that would forever haunt the town of Allendale, Dakwa raised the weapon and fired 3 shots. The sound shattered the stillness of the evening, echoing through the trees like a chilling reminder of the irreversible. Dime collapsed to the ground, her life stolen in an instant. For a fleeting second, Dakwa stood frozen, staring at the lifeless body before him, the enormity of what he had done beginning to sink in. For a brief moment, Dakwa stood there, paralyzed by the reality of what he had done. The enormity of his actions hit him like a tidal wave, but instead of turning himself in, he chose to cover his tracks. He dragged Dime's lifeless body to a ditch nearby, hoping it would go unnoticed long enough for him to craft an alibi. Then he drove home, his heart pounding as he began erasing the evidence. Back in town, the rumor mill didn't stop. If anything, Dime's sudden disappearance added fuel to the fire. Her friends and family were quick to notice that something was wrong. They reported her missing, and the police soon became involved. As days turned into weeks, the pressure on Dakwa grew, but he clung to his facade, attending church meetings and delivering sermons as though nothing had happened. Little did he know, The walls were closing in, and justice was on its way. But instead of facing the consequences, Dakwa chose to cover his tracks. He dragged Dime's body to a ditch nearby, his heart pounding as he worked to hide the evidence. The once sacred forest, a place of solace for the two, had become the setting for a heinous crime. The weight of his actions bore down on him, but his survival instincts took over. He left the scene hurriedly, driving home with trembling hands, his mind racing with plans to destroy the evidence. At home, he began erasing any trace of what had happened. He burned his clothes in the backyard under the cover of darkness, watching the flames consume the fabric that carried the stains of his guilt. Then, he dismantled the gun meticulously, each piece representing a fragment of the crime he hoped to make disappear. Over the next few hours, he traveled to different parts of Allendale, throwing the gun's pieces into lakes, rivers, and secluded creeks, convinced that this would be enough to evade the law. As Dakwa worked to hide his actions, the community of Allendale continued its routine, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Dime's sudden absence, however, did not go unnoticed. Her family grew worried when she failed to return home, and her friends began making calls, searching for answers. The small town's usual tranquility was about to be shattered, as the seeds of a deeper investigation were about to take root. In Dime's bedroom stepped one figure, the teenage son of Dunny Raven, who was missing. Dakwa went further in his efforts to cover his tracks. He fabricated alibis, claiming to have been at a prayer meeting during the time of the crime. Leveraging his respected status as a pastor, he attempted to deflect any suspicion that might arise. However, the close-knit community of Allendale was not so easily misled. Dime's sudden absence raised alarm among her loved ones, who immediately began searching for answers. Questions filled the air. Where had she gone? Who had seen her last? The community's concerns quickly brought the police into the picture. As the investigation progressed, officers found glaring inconsistencies in Dakwa's accounts, casting doubt on his version of events. The FBI joined the case, suspecting that Dime's murder might be a hate crime. They examined Dakwa's phone records, which showed text messages between him and Dime on the day of her death. Witnesses came forward, saying they'd seen Dakwa and Dime together that evening. Despite his attempts to hide what he'd done, the evidence against Dakwa began to pile up. In the months that followed, Allendale was torn apart by the revelations. Dakwa's congregation was divided. Some people refused to believe he was capable of such a heinous act, while others felt betrayed and disgusted. Dime's family, meanwhile, fought tirelessly for justice. They refused to let her be forgotten, holding vigils and speaking out about the dangers faced by transgender individuals, particularly in small conservative towns like Allendale. Dakwa's trial began in early 2024, and the courtroom was packed every day. The prosecution laid out a compelling case, presenting the text messages, witness statements, and forensic evidence linking Dakwa to the crime. They argued that his actions were not just a murder, but a hate crime, motivated by his inability to accept Dime's identity and their relationship. The defense, meanwhile, tried to paint Dakwa as a man under immense pressure, someone who made a terrible mistake in a moment of weakness. But the jury saw through the excuses. On February 24, 2024, they found Dakwa guilty of first-degree murder and a federal hate crime. It was a historic verdict, marking the first time in the United States that someone was convicted of a federal hate crime for killing a transgender person. For Dime's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring her back. In the aftermath of the trial, Allendale struggled to heal. The town's deep-seated prejudices were laid bare, forcing difficult conversations about acceptance and the cost of living in fear. Dime's story became a symbol of resilience and a call to action for those fighting for equality and justice. And as for Dakwa, he spent the rest of his life behind bars, haunted by the weight of his actions and the love he destroyed. While Dime's story is deeply tragic and shocking, the events that unfold in the next story are even more unimaginable. The man involved took things to a whole new level, making choices that no one could have predicted. It's a story of deceit, desperation, and a shocking twist that will leave you questioning how far someone can go. Keep watching, because what happens next is truly beyond belief. Stick around. You won't believe what happens next. On the morning of December 7, 2018, in Detroit, Michigan, a woman named Kelly Stoff was found lying on the cold pavement near East McNichols and Brush. She had been shot once and left to die. The news of her death spread quickly, leaving many in the community shocked. Kelly was known for her love of fashion and her presence in Detroit's ballroom scene. To those who knew her, she was more than just a face in the crowd. She was a vibrant personality who stood out wherever she went. But behind the glamour and confidence, Kelly had secrets, and one of them involved a man named Albert Weathers, a local pastor with a lot to lose. Albert Weathers was a respected figure in his community. To the outside world, he was a devoted husband, a man of faith, and a role model. But behind closed doors, he lived a very different life. Albert had been secretly seeing Kelly for some time. They first met in Palmer Park, a well-known area in Detroit where Kelly sometimes worked. It started with small conversations, stolen moments away from prying eyes. Albert was drawn to Kelly's energy and charm, but he was also terrified of what people would think if they found out about their relationship. He had built his entire life on an image of righteousness, and Kelly was the one thing that could bring it all crashing down. As their relationship grew, Kelly became more demanding. She loved the finer things in life: designer clothes, expensive outings, and luxurious gifts. Albert, eager to keep her happy and quiet, indulged her requests. But it wasn't long before things took a turn. Kelly knew Albert's deepest secret, and she wasn't afraid to use it against him. She and a close friend decided that it was time to cash in on what they knew. They demanded money from Albert, threatening to expose their relationship to his church if he didn't pay up. For Albert, the pressure was unbearable. He had too much to lose: his marriage, his position, and his reputation. Albert's life outside the church was far from the image he portrayed. Friends of Kelly had often seen them together in public places far from Detroit, where Albert felt safer. He took her on trips and spent lavishly, all while maintaining the illusion of a devoted husband back home. Kelly's friend, who was deeply involved in their plans, often hinted that Albert's double life couldn't last forever. She encouraged Kelly to push harder, convinced that he would eventually crack under the weight of his deception. Meanwhile, Albert grew more paranoid. He started avoiding Kelly in public and even ignored her calls at times, hoping she would back off. But Kelly knew too much and was not willing to walk away without compensation. She began showing up unexpectedly at his workplace and even his home, causing him to panic. Albert felt trapped, knowing that if his wife or church members ever found out, it would destroy him. The more he tried to distance himself, the more desperate Kelly became, and the pressure kept building to a breaking point. Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment to think. What would you do if you were in Albert's shoes, with so much to lose? Would you let fear take over? Share your thoughts in the comments and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let's continue. Albert tried to reason with Kelly, pleading with her to reconsider. He even promised to find another way to support her lifestyle without things escalating. But Kelly was determined. She felt she had invested too much in their relationship to walk away empty-handed. Her friend, who was also well aware of the situation, encouraged Kelly to keep pressing Albert for more money, convinced that he would eventually give in. The tension between them reached its peak, and Albert's anxiety grew with each passing day. Feeling the walls closing in, Albert made a decision that would change everything. He arranged to meet Kelly, pretending that he would give her the money she wanted, but instead of handing over the cash, he pulled out a gun and shot her. Kelly's friend, who had been with her, managed to escape. Frightened and unsure of what to do, she ran as fast as she could, fearing that Albert might come after her next. She eventually found safety and called for help, but it was too late for Kelly. As Kelly lay there, Albert stood frozen for a moment, staring at what he had done. Panic set in, and his first instinct was to get rid of any evidence. He grabbed Kelly's phone and quickly searched through it, deleting messages and contacts that could link them together. He wiped down the gun and tossed it into a nearby dumpster, hoping it would never be found. Then, without looking back, he hurried away from the scene, his heart pounding in his chest. Albert, on the other hand, tried to cover his tracks. Instead of calling the police right away, he went to work at the Great Lakes Water Authority as if nothing had happened. An hour later, he finally called 911, claiming that he had shot someone in self-defense during an attempted robbery. But something about his story didn't add up. The police were already investigating, and evidence at the scene told a different story. There were no signs of a struggle, and witnesses in the area described seeing a man matching Albert's description leaving the scene in a hurry. The police took a closer look at Albert's movements that morning. Surveillance cameras from nearby businesses captured him leaving the crime scene and driving off in a hurry. His behavior at work also raised suspicion. His colleagues noticed he was unusually quiet and seemed distracted. Detectives found inconsistencies in his timeline when they interviewed him again, raising more doubts about his self-defense claim. Meanwhile, Kelly's friend, who had narrowly escaped, provided the police with critical information. She recounted the threats Albert had made before the shooting and shared text messages that showed how desperate he had become. Investigators found deleted messages on Kelly's phone, recovered through forensic tools, which revealed the extent of their interactions and the pressure Albert was under. The investigation moved quickly. The police gathered surveillance footage, phone records, and statements from Kelly's friends and family. It didn't take long before they connected the dots. Albert was arrested, and during questioning, his story began to fall apart. The prosecutors argued that this wasn't a case of self-defense, but rather a premeditated murder driven by fear and desperation. Albert had too much to hide, and Kelly was a threat to everything he had built. During the trial, the courtroom was packed with people who wanted to know how a man who preached about love and forgiveness could commit such a crime. Kelly's family and friends sat in silence, listening to the details of the case. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who was willing to do anything to protect his image, even if it meant taking a life. They presented messages between Albert and Kelly that showed the extent of their relationship and the growing tension between them. Adding to the complexity of the case, investigators uncovered financial transactions between Albert and Kelly that suggested he had been paying her for years to keep their relationship hidden. Bank records revealed several large withdrawals made by Albert in the months leading up to the murder, further supporting the prosecution's claims that Kelly's demands for money had become relentless. Friends of Kelly also testified that she had confided in them about Albert's growing frustration and his increasing paranoia about being exposed. Albert's defense tried to argue that he acted out of fear, that Kelly and her friend were extorting him, and that he had no choice. They pointed out the emotional turmoil Albert had been experiencing, highlighting his struggle to balance his public and private life. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic reports, the witness testimonies, and Albert's own inconsistencies made it clear that this was no accident. Kelly said it was a calculated act of violence. In the end, Albert was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to prison, and his once respected reputation was shattered. The church that once stood behind him distanced themselves, and his family struggled to come to terms with what had happened. For Kelly's loved ones, justice had been served, but it did little to ease the pain of losing someone they cared about so deeply. Kelly's story became a cautionary tale in Detroit, a reminder of how secrets and fear can lead to tragic outcomes. Her friends in the ballroom scene continued to honor her memory, keeping her spirit alive through the community she loved so much. And as for Albert, he was left to spend his days behind bars, reflecting on the choices that led him there. This case highlights how dangerous it can be to live a double life, and how fear of exposure can push people to make devastating decisions. It also sheds light on the challenges faced by transgender individuals, who often navigate relationships filled with secrecy and risk. Kelly was more than just a victim. She was a person with dreams, ambitions, and a life that mattered. And her story will not be forgotten. These stories show how fear and hidden lives can lead to horrible actions. Kelly's death and the shocking things the man in the second story did remind us that there is often more to people than we can see. If you want to hear another surprising story, click the card on the screen now to watch, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories.